everyone. Welcome back to Ashram Talks today. We have a really interesting topic. I know we've kind of been discussing this in the recent weeks, but we're going to talk about how to maintain some inner peace and clarity, no matter how challenging things might get, right, in the day to day. And I'm really excited to present this topic because we are going to be joined by Abhimanyu Wolf, joining us from the US today. Welcome, Abhimanyu. How are you?
I'm doing very well this morning. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. So Abhimanyu is a lifelong practitioner of Bhakti Yoga. And, very fitting for today, he is actually also a mental health counselor. So he has a lot of experience, examining topics like anxiety and depression, but obviously through the lens of your spiritual practice. I think that's really interesting.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. It's been again, Bhakti Yoga has been a lifelong passion and interest for me, and since my teenage years, I've been fascinated with the mind, fascinated with psychology, and so I've been blessed to be on this spiritual journey of really learning to come through to the end of suffering and actually find peace and happiness in spiritual life.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's definitely what we're all looking for, right? So I think you have a really interesting perspective. We're really excited to dive into this topic with you. So whenever you're ready, we can just get started for today. Thanks again.
All right, thank you so much, Sienna, for your lovely introduction. And so Yes, yeah. So today we are focusing on Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 56, and I will give a short prayer of invocation to invoke auspiciousness, to invoke divine grace for our discussion today. Then I will begin with the topic. Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shrirupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitangscha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. All right, and so the this Bhagavad Gita verse, chapter 2, verse 56. Dukesh vanudvignamana sukeshu vigataspriha vita raga bhaya krodha stita dhirmuni ruchite. As Srila Prabhupada translates it, one who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. And I will actually admit that one of the reasons I chose this particular verse was that one of my favorite verses in the Bhagavad Gita is chapter 4, verse 10, which has a very, an identical line starting Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha Manmaya Mamupashrita Bahavo Jnana Tapasa Putamad Bhagavapam Agata. It's from the fourth chapter where Krishna says, being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in me, many, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me, and thus they all attained transcendental love for me. And so, my eye was caught by the similarity in these verses. And so yeah, it's a very interesting thing that Krishna is talking about in this verse as he speaks to Arjuna, one who's not disturbed in spite of the threefold miseries. And so, for some context, what are the threefold miseries? So there's the adhyatmika klesh, miseries from one's own body and mind. Adibautic klesh, miseries caused by other living entities. It could be, animals harassing us. It could be other human beings causing us difficulty. And then there's adidaivik klesh, miseries caused by supernatural forces. Again, hurricane, weather forces. Adidaivik literally, implies, the acts of the demigods in Vedic culture. And so yeah, it's it's maybe more intuitive to think of, okay, not being disturbed. Okay, well, somebody else is bothering me, and I can maybe learn to not be disturbed by that. Or okay, well, there's like those. I mean, I'm from Florida, and so we get a lot of hurricanes in Florida. I'm not there at the moment, but so hurricanes come to mind for me. Yeah, oh yeah, there's usually a hurricane season every year, and like there for maybe a week afterward, there's all kinds of debris and branches and stuff. Um, and so it's like, okay, well, now this hurricane's bothering me. There's a telephone pole down, whatever it is. Um, but then adhyatmic, and then, adhyatmic clash, miseries from the body. It's like, okay, even if my body is, maybe I'm suffering from some kind of disease or something like that. Okay, maybe I can learn to be content or not overly disturbed when my body is in difficulty. But part of adhyatmic clash includes miseries of the mind itself. And so that is, perhaps, I guess, what I find the most curious, to not be disturbed in spite of the threefold miseries, including even if my mind is disturbed, to not be disturbed. And so what Krishna is awakening us to is that we have to break our identification with not only, all that we think is mine, but all that we identify as I, with, the false ego. Krishna, he talks about, what was it, ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate, that the bewildered soul under the, you know, being under the veil of a false ego, a false sense of doership. Ahamkar literally means I do, if you break down the Sanskrit words. And it makes us think that, again, kartahamiti manyate, I'm the one who's actually doing everything, who's actually creating the results of my actions. I'm the one who's making things happen in this world. And so, in order to actually begin letting go of our suffering, letting go, not being disturbed by all that's happening in this world, not taking it so personally, we have to begin to break all of our false identification. And so, Srila Prabhupada would often talk about the most basic ahankar is that I am this body. And so the first step in spiritual life is to realize I am not this body. And so to break it into more detail, in the second and third cantos, especially the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada, he gives us the purports to the discussion between Lord Kapila Dev, an empowered incarnation of the Lord of transcendence, and his mother, Devahuti. And so Kapila Dev, he goes through a very beautiful, very fascinating description of the creation of the whole material cosmos. And the modern evolutionary theory wants to believe that from nothing came everything, from matter came spirit, or from matter came life. And so what our ancient wisdom scriptures discuss is that it was exactly the opposite. From life came matter, from consciousness came matter. And so Lord Kapila Dev, he talks about how originally there's the first, once the masculine aspect of the absolute truth, Mahavishnu, glances on the material nature, Krishna says, Aham bija pradapita, I believe in the 14th chapter of the Gita. He says, I'm the seed-giving father of this whole entire universe, of the whole material cosmos. So he says, I'm the seed-giving father. And once he agitates the material energy, then from what was originally an undifferentiated material element by the will of the Lord, then the first element that manifests in this creation is called Mahat Tattva, or pure consciousness. And so that pure consciousness, there's a portion of it in each of us known as the Chitta. Again, just refers to consciousness. And the nature of that consciousness is that it's very peaceful. It's like clear, calm waters. It's peaceful. It's undisturbed. It's very light and bright. And one of its qualities is that it naturally accepts the form of Bhagavan in the heart, of, again, transcendence. And so by the influence of time, gradually that consciousness condenses, and then it starts to manifest the pranas or the life airs. And so what I'm talking about, it's on one hand, it's the universal creation, and simultaneously, it describes the creation of our own individual body. There's the what was it? The big universe, which is the physical universe we live in, and then each of the Vedas, these ancient wisdom scriptures, they talk about how each of our bodies is sort of a microcosm of the whole universe. That the 24 elements that are present in the universe are also present in our own individual body. And so, by discussing the creation of the universe, Lord Kapila, he also talks about the makeup, the field of activities of our own body, that which we are misidentifying with, that which we are suffering with. So, even to understand that I'm not this body, I need to understand what is this body that I'm not, so that I can then start to let go of my identification with it. And so, yeah, first, from the soul's sojourn in this world, there's consciousness, which then condenses into the life airs. And by the movement of those life airs and the consciousness, then we start, as we're, again, conscious, we're experiencing this world, then we start to, certain things due to, maybe it's due to previous impressions, certain things we see create kind of impressions in our consciousness, memories called samskaras. And so as those samskaras solidify, we have different desires and inclinations based on that samskara. Okay, I want to go to this particular career, or whatever it is. It's because I have, for me, it was the career of psychology. I have some samskar tied with mental health, tied with understanding the mind. And so, those samskars are made up of desires based on previous impressions. And as that originally bright, clear chitta or consciousness gets all these solidified samskars, then it starts to become darker and darker. And from those samskars are born ahankar, the false ego, that based on all the different experiences that we have, based on those deep impressions, we start to develop a sense of I. And this is all tied with the three modes, that the consciousness alone is, sometimes it's actually described as Shuddha Sattva, although in context of the material creation, it is described as almost pure goodness, that it has a tinge of the material modes in it. The pranas, the life airs, are the first manifestation of the modes of passion. It's important to discuss this all in terms of the three modes. The Gita does talk in terms of how the three modes pervade everything in our experience. And then ahankar, the false ego, is a product, the first product of the mode of darkness, the mode of tamas, or also known as the mode of ignorance, because again, it's the first gross manifestation of, okay, I am this body, I am of this material world. And so this is where, you could say the darkness of ignorance begins for us. One of our famous prayers, Agyana Timarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya, my spiritual master delivered me from the darkness of ignorance. And so that avidya, that darkness of ignorance, is forgetting my spiritual identity and assuming a false material identity. Assuming a false identity separate from my relationship with transcendence. And so from this, false ego, then when that false ego, which is naturally of the nature of the mode of ignorance, comes from that false ego in connection with the mode of goodness. Because again, the three modes, they're always vying for supremacy. I was actually recently listening to one of Simon Haas's previous ashram talks on a previous verse, and he very nicely explained that the three modes, they're always competing, more or less. They're vying for supremacy, and so they're constantly mixing. We're pretty much never purely in the mode of goodness, or purely in the mode of passion, or purely in the mode of ignorance in this world. There's always some mix of the influence of the three modes, the three gunas in our body, or in our experience of life. And so this description of the creation of the elements, this description of the creation of our very bodies that we live in, it is also, a creation of the different interactions of the three modes. That once that ahankar, that false ego that's created of the mode of ignorance, then interacts with the mode of goodness, then you could say post-egoic mind comes into being, the mind which is accepting, rejecting, wanting to, try to find enjoyment in this world. And again, even though it's a product of the mode of goodness, it's mixed with the mode of ignorance, because again, you know, I'm starting with a false ego and then trying to enjoy it. Sort of like with mathematics. If you if you mistakenly think that 1 + 1 = 3, then everything you get from there, the rest of the equation becomes wrong. And so similarly, when we start our activities in this world, even if we start our approach to spiritual life with, okay, I am this body, I am this mind, whatever it is, if our ego, if our sense of I-ness is anything other than I'm a spirit soul, I have an eternal relationship of servitude to the divine, known by so many names such as Krishna, Govinda, and such. Um, if I get the first part of the equation wrong, then the rest of the equation goes awry. And so that false ego mixed with the mode of goodness produces the um, produces the mind, and the post-egoic mind. I'm seeing in the comments, have I written any books? I've not written any books. Not as of this time. Um, a lot of what I'm getting, again, it's there in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and I have many spiritual mentors. It was actually one devotee named Prem Prayojan Prabhu. He spoke a lecture on this really detailed topic of consciousness. So I just recently listened to it. It's fresh in my mind. But yes, I've not written any books to date. Um, and then continuing the topic, when that false ego mixes with the mode of passion, then it produces the post-egoic intelligence. And that intelligence is discriminating, it's doubting. The first function of intelligence is to doubt. Um, so whatever information we're given, it is natural that we at least have maybe a healthy skepticism to it, as we carefully consider it and carefully consider, does it match my experience? Is it in line with these ancient wisdom scriptures? And then when the false ego, again, product of the mode of ignorance, then mixes with the mode of ignorance again, then it actually produces the sound element. And then from that sound element, ether or space is produced. And then from that, what was it? From ether, then the sense of touch is produced. From the sense of touch, the wind element is produced. From the wind element, form is produced. From the sense object of form, fire is produced. From fire, taste, I believe it was taste is produced, then water, then fragrance, and then finally, the grossest or most physical of all elements, earth, is produced. And so this is the breakdown, the description of how we went from most subtle, from again consciousness, to most gross, to dull matter. And so tying this all back in with the Gita verse, um, to start to free myself from the threefold miseries, I have to first recognize, what is this mind and body that I am not? I have to learn that, okay, again, even if there are thoughts coming in my mind due to previous samskars, due to, um, previous senses of ego that I've developed, I have to recognize that, yeah, I am not the thoughts in my mind. And this is definitely something I work with my clients on in mental health counseling. Depending on the nature of who my clients are, the setting I'm doing my counseling in, I don't always have the most facility to talk in such direct spiritual terms as I am today. But I definitely go into the topic that, yeah, we have to recognize, not only am I not my body, but I'm not my mind. And so when a thought comes into my head, I have to learn to not even take my thoughts personally. There's a book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, where, true to the title, he says there are four agreements we need to make with ourselves in order to be free of suffering in this world. The first one is be impeccable with your word. The second agreement is take nothing personally. The third agreement is make no assumptions. And the fourth agreement is to always do your very best. And so the the first two agreements, be impeccable with your word and take nothing personally, are particularly relevant to this topic of letting go of false egos. Because he says be impeccable with your word means, again, don't create a false identity out of yourself. Again, guilt and shame in particular is the idea that I myself am bad, unlovable, unworthy. Guilt is, at least depending on who defines it, it's more the idea that, okay, I did something wrong. I made a mistake. My choice was bad. And so that's okay. Well, I'm recognizing the choice was bad, but I'm not making an identity out of it. So I can learn from that guilt and I can move on with my life. And so then I'm not overly disturbed by by even my own mistake. And on the topic how to find peace of mind in difficult times, one of the most difficult times is when we ourselves are the cause of suffering. Again, I make a bad choice that leads to some bad karma, some bad consequences. And so one of the key things to find some peace of mind is to recognize that who I am and what I've done are two separate things, that I need to deliberately, intentionally not create a whole new ahankar, a whole new false ego out of a mistake that I've made. And so yeah, when we're conscious enough to not create a new ego out of either a mistake we made or something bad that happened to us, or as this verse is saying, even not to be overly elated when happiness occurs, then again I'm able to move forward peacefully, to not be overly distressed when that happiness ends, or to be overly distressed when the external circumstances of my life aren't improving as I'd like them to. And so yeah, when we're conscious enough, then we can stop creating new senses of I. When we give in sort of to that maybe tamasic tendency to identify with all that's happened, to identify with our mistakes, to identify with bad things that have happened to us, to identify with all of our past samskars of now I've built up all these impressions. Then what happens is we go from guilt to the more unhealthy sense of shame. And my distinction here of guilt and shame, it's largely based on a book called Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, where she, these are her definitions for guilt and shame that I'm using here specifically. So she defines shame as the idea that I myself am bad or unlovable. That there's, it's not just that I made a mistake. I am the mistake, or that mistake I made now makes me unlovable. Essentially, that my faults make me unlovable, unworthy, inherently bad. And so again, now it's not just like, okay, I'm recognizing that I have human flaws and I made a mistake and I learn from it and I move on with my life. No, this is again that thing that happened, that mistake I made, that is my identity. Um, that's that how I messed up back then, that defines who I am, or this bad quality I have, this struggle I have, this defines me. And so again, now this becomes my ahankar, this becomes my false ego. And so with the false ego that I am bad, unworthy, unlovable, whatever it is, I start to behave as such. I start to behave as I believe a bad, unworthy, unlovable person would behave naturally. With such a false ego, this is now my 1 + 1 = 3, that I'm bad, unworthy, unlovable. So the rest of the equation, no matter what I put in there that seems good, even if my material circumstances improve, finances get better, people start treating me nicely, then still from such a mistaken egoic place, then we get into what's called self-sabotage, where we can again, well, okay, now I'm not worthy of it, and so then people can become, ironically, more afraid of success than happiness. And so, going into the second half of the verse, how Krishna is describing how the Stita Dhira Muni, the sage of steady mind, he's free from attachment, fear, and anger. And again, a lot of this does stem back to just not creating any new false egos, learning to recognize and let go of any false egos, false senses of identity that we've thus far created for ourselves. Then we start to become free from false attachment. First, there's I, and then once we have the sense of I, then there's mine. So the more I can let go of the false sense of I, then I can start to recognize that, okay, the things of this world are not mine. Fundamentally, the fact that, even my own body and senses can be taken away at any moment, either by disease or at the time of death. I in one sense can't really say it's mine if it can be taken away, whether that's my own body and senses or the health and body and senses of anyone I love. If it were all truly mine, no one could no one could take it away from me. But that's not the case in this world. That in the Four Agreements, Dominic Elveries, he calls it the angel of death. I think in Gita terms we might call it the time factor or the will of the Supreme Lord. The time factor. What was it? I think Krishna says of destroyers, I am time, and time is ultimately what puts the three modes of material nature into motion. So yeah, that the time factor, it destroys everything in this world. It ultimately kills off anything that's dead, everything of the past that is no longer meant to stay here. The time factor removes for us so that we can live in the present, so that we can actually move forward. And so we need to recognize that the time factor, the angel of death, whatever name we're going to give it, it's ultimately a blessing for us. And when we can recognize that, yeah, I'm not entitled to anything in this world, right down to my own body. I'm not entitled to it since it can be taken at any time. That means that anything I have now, my own body, the good health of my relatives, my career, the opportunity to pursue spiritual life, these are all gifts that can be taken away at any time. And thus, I need to treasure them in the present and recognize them as that, as gifts, not as mine, not as something that I'm entitled to, but as opportunities for further self-realization. And so, yeah, by letting go of that false sense of I start to let go of the attachment, which again, what was it? Dhyato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu bhajayate, sangat sanjayate kamat, kamat krodho bijayate. I think it's actually maybe just in a few more verses in the second chapter. Krishna explains to Arjuna that by contemplating the object of the senses, attachment develops. And then from attachment, the calm, lust. And in Vedic terms, the word calm or lust does not just refer to sexual desire, but to any desire to enjoy our senses in this world. So from contemplating the object of the senses, we develop an attachment to that. Okay, I want someone to treat me this way, or I want to eat this particular food, or whatever it may be. And then from that, okay, now I have calm. I have the desire to enjoy. If that desire is not fulfilled, then I have krodha, which again, Krishna describes in this verse. We need to become free of that anger, which is ultimately born of the mode of passion, born of that. When we're in that mode of just unlimited desire, then we eventually give into anger. And also, even if we do get our desires fulfilled, then there's bhaya, there's the fear that I may lose everything I have, I may not get everything I have. Bhayam dutiya benivesha tasyat, that one of the natures of living in this material world is that we live in a fearful state. We live in a fearful state because we are out of touch with transcendence. We're, again, misidentifying with the body and mind, misidentifying ourselves as the doers, as sort of the creators of what happens in our lives. Was it? Yeah, that Krishna, he talks about how our false ego has us thinking that we're the doer, has us relying on ourselves for everything, which creates a fearful existence because I can't, if there's so much that's not in my control in this world, and yet I'm taking responsibility. I'm taking responsibility for what's not mine, and I'm not taking responsibility for what is mine. I'm trying to, change aspects of the external world that are out of my control, rather than focusing on what is within my control, what I can let go of within myself. And so then I create a very fearful, anxiety-ridden existence for myself. And so, I'll start to wrap up the topic here, that Krishna, he is saying that, yes, by letting go of our false ego, and that means developing the real ego, that I'm an eternal spirit soul, Jivara Swarupahoy Krishnara Nityadas. I am an eternal servant of that beautiful spiritual reality, Sri Krishna. That is my natural position. What was it? Muktir hitvanyata rupam svarupena vyavastiti, that true liberation is to actually be situated in my real spiritual identity, my spiritual identity as a soul, separate from my mind, separate from my body, and in relation with the Supreme Soul. And so, by the more we stay situated in that, and in again practical terms, what a lot of times where that can start is okay, like Srila Parvati would say, okay, point to your nose and point to your foot, point to your head, point to your hand, now point to yourself. And usually, when he would do that exercise, people are just kind of like broadly pointing back at their body, and they're not exactly sure. Okay, myself is just over here somewhere. And so yeah, we by recognizing, okay, first, I'm not this body. It's not I hand, it's my hand. But more subtly, it's being willing to look at our own thoughts, our own feelings, especially when we're in feelings of distress and our mind is racing, to be able to just sort of get in the habit of observing our own experience of life, to say, okay, I notice that I'm having this feeling of anger. I notice that I'm having this thought that everything's going to go badly. And so as soon as I can observe it, I can choose to react. Okay. And, I notice I'm having the thought that everything's going to go badly. Is that true? Do I choose to believe that thought? Or do I choose to question and say, well, maybe everything will go badly, but again, that is an assumption. That assumption predisposes me to act as if everything will go badly. And ironically, that does make it more likely that things will go badly. And so by just getting in the habit of observing my own experience, observing the thoughts and feelings that come, I can break my identity with them. Now I'm not identified with the thought that things are going to go badly. Now I'm not identified with a feeling of sadness that arises. Now, okay, I'm experiencing my experience. I'm experiencing these aspects of what I'm conscious of, but I'm not creating a whole new ahankar each time a new thought comes up. I'm not creating a new ahankar out of everything that doesn't go my way. I'm not creating a new ahankar from a feeling that arose. I'm just experiencing, and I'm staying steady in the identification that, yeah, I am a spiritual being, not of this world. I'm experiencing, I'm a spiritual being having a human experience, not a human being having a spiritual experience ultimately. And so that is, yeah, that is ultimately where we begin to let go of our suffering and then begin to develop peace and spiritual happiness. So I think I will stop there for today.
Thank you so much, Abhimanyu, for your insights. Yeah, there were so many like great, again, like insights, I guess, that came out of what you said today. You even got a request to write a book. So yeah, maybe you better get started on that too. I think there's some interest there.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like what you're mentioning, we do often create, I guess, a whole story, or like you said, a whole identity out of, something we do, or like one thing that goes wrong. Now that you say it, it's like, it's so clear. It's like, oh yeah, we're doing that all the time. Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you brought up. And I was listening to another discussion a few days ago, and someone said something like, we shouldn't look at spiritual texts through the lens of our emotions. We should look at our
Hmm.
emotions through the lens of spiritual texts. If
Uh-huh.
that makes sense. Is that what you find yourself doing, like with your background in spiritual life and mental health counseling?
I had never heard it put in those terms, but I've heard a somewhat similar statement. People say, okay, well, don't try to adjust the scripture to your understanding. Try to
Yeah.
adjust your understanding to the scripture. So it's a similar statement, but I really like how they put it. Of don't view your the scriptures through your emotions. View your emotions through the scripture. I really like that.
Yeah, definitely. And like I know we're kind of running out of time here, but as you're working with clients, and again, right, with your background and your life experience, and clearly you study these topics, do you find yourself identifying these things like, oh, this is the false ego, or this is, some type of attachment? Do you like take it? Yeah.
So it is a constant ongoing practice. There are times where where I have the clarity of mind to recognize, okay, maybe I'm having a catastrophic thought here. Let me observe that. Let me not act on it. And there are some times where it's just like, some time elapses before, when I'm just sort of identifying with my thought. And naturally, we don't necessarily realize we're identifying with our thoughts because it's the mind, it's so intimately tied with our experience. So yeah, there are some times where quite a lot of time can elapse where I'm kind of identifying with the whole mental and emotional thing going on, and then at some point, maybe in the course of mantra meditation or hearing spiritual discourse or whatever part of my spiritual practice I'm doing, or in conversation with others, then I start to identify, like, okay, I've been taking things personally in a way I don't need to. I've been creating an identity out of this thing, which is like, okay, like I need to, I need to not identify with this thing that happened. I need to not sort of hold on to this bit of the past, like just accept that that chapter of the past is written, and I need to focus on writing the current chapter of my life. So it is definitely an ongoing practice. It's not, but certainly in my experience, it is not a one time, one and done realization. It is an ongoing practice of letting go of identification with the mind and realigning myself spiritually.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think like based on everything you talked about, I definitely get the sense that taking the time to actually study and kind of learn like, okay, what is consciousness? What is the mind? I'm sure that that's a really helpful tool, right? And in working with others, but then also kind of just trying to, I guess, make sense of the things that we're feeling and experiencing, right? I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you again so much for joining us today. Your perspective, your insight has been really interesting. So we definitely hope that you'll join us again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for hosting me.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you again.
Thank you. Goodbye.
All right. And thanks again to everyone else who joined us for your comments. We look forward to continuing to explore these topics again. So hopefully we'll see you soon, Monday at 7:30 p.m.